Good morning, everyone. I hope your day has been going well. My name is Ali Dawad, and this is my socio-scientific project for our Biology 1 course, and it is about the impact of pesticides on human health. So before we get into it, here's just a little background of the history of pesticides and their use primarily in the US. So the widespread adoption of pesticides happened during the 1950s, and it was associated with an increase in crop yields and the opening up of new agricultural land. Uh, this caused a shift from local organic produce to mass-produced food with chemical residue from the pesticides. Cynthia Curl, a professor at Boise State University in Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences, claims that 73% of produce in supermarkets contains pesticide residue, and that 75% of the US population has pesticide chemicals or residue in their urine from ingesting those tainted produces. Yeah, and so continuing the background, the World Health Organization, WHO, says that more than 1,000 pesticides are used worldwide, with each pesticide having different properties and toxicological effects when consumed. They also claim that in 2019, the global pesticide usage reached around 4.1 million tons, and that the US alone uses more than 600 different pesticides and has consumed around 500 million kilograms in 2018. Now you may be wondering why this is important, and that's sort of a complex question because there's a lot of different perspectives that you could look at this issue from. The first one being the growing world population and food security concerns. Now the World Health Organization cites that they estimate that by the year 2050 we will have a world population of 9.7 billion people. And obviously world hunger is a prevalent issue right now. So pesticides are needed to increase crop yield to prevent the world hunger from increasing, basically, with the population. Additionally, pesticides have an economic benefit. Egal Frank, an assistant professor at the University of Chicago Harris School of Public Policy, states that there was a $26.9 billion loss in agricultural losses when natural pesticides failed. So pesticides are very important at keeping crop yield and reducing money losses from farming. Sorry. And then finally, Wei Zhu from the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the Israel Institute of Technology in Shantou, China, claims that there's a health crisis regarding pesticides and states that 385 million people are poisoned and 11,000 are killed by pesticides annually. And he also claims that a big majority of that population is from farmers. And he states that globally, 44% of farmers get poisoned every year due to their increased exposure to raw pesticides when they're applying it in the crop fields. So now that we have looked at the all the different sides of this issue, we are going to go and take a look at supporting evidence for pesticide usage. So as I said previously, the World Health Organization cites that by the year 2050, we will have a world population of 9.7 billion. That is a 20.3% increase from our current population of 8.06 billion. And because of this, we will need a dramatic increase in our food production to keep up with the growing demand. Additionally, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations estimates that 80% of the increase in food production needed is going to be an increase of yields or harvests. So pesticides can help prevent crop losses, which will in turn increase the yields that the FAO have spoke of. And additionally, in certain areas, you will be able to plant and harvest these crops more frequently when certain pesticides are applied. So pesticides are a big help in upping food production. Sorry. So now that we have looked at the supporting evidence for pesticide usage, we're going to take a look at the supporting evidence against pesticide usage. So Wei Zhu claims that there's an acute poisoning crisis occurring associated with pesticides. Zhu and his colleagues report that approximately 385 million cases of unintentional acute pesticide poisoning occur annually worldwide, including around 11,000 fatalities. This represents a massive global health burden, with about 44% of farmers being poisoned by pesticides every year, according to their analysis. Additionally, they did a chronic disease risk assessment by looking at control groups that are exposed to pesticides regularly and groups that are not exposed to pesticides regularly. And in their analysis, they demonstrated that pesticide exposure increases your baseline risk of Parkinson's disease by 70% and your baseline lymphoma risk up 41%. Additionally, Zhu's team documents extensive environmental spread, with pesticide contamination being detected in water sources 50 to 100 kilometers away from application sites. And this contamination occurs primarily in developing countries where they may not have the same policies as the US or other nations do that sort of limit the risk of pesticide spreading. And additionally, in developing countries, PPE is not readily available for the farmers who are actually applying the pesticides. And because of this, they're at an even greater risk of all the negative health consequences that are caused by pesticides. So now that we have looked at the supporting evidence for pesticides and against pesticides, we're going to look at some alternative viewpoints that bring up some interesting ideas that neither the previous parties have. And this comes from Eagle Frank, who brings an interesting alternative to chemical pesticides in the form of biological pesticides. Now, biological pesticides is the use of animals, plants, fungi, or even bacteria to control crop-damaging pests. And their pros is that they reduce environmental persistence and bioaccumulation of pesticides in things like the water and soil. And additionally, they can be used in organic farms without compromising their certification. So basically, it's less toxic to the environment and to humans, and it can be easily implemented into already standing farms. And now some of the cons of biological pesticides are that they are slower to act and they have a much shorter shelf life compared to chemical pesticides due to them being like living creatures. Additionally, due to them basically being living creatures, it's much more expensive to develop as they each heavily depend on the region and what sort of pests are currently available at those farms. So now we're going to go and take a look at the societal and ethical implications of this topic. So in society, according to Zhu and his colleagues, Africa experiences the lowest pesticide consumption globally, and not by choice, but due to a reduced government oversight in agriculture, despite a strong reliance on agriculture. The review documents that up to 45% of crops are destroyed annually in developing countries without adequate pest control. So in Africa, this translates to massive food security threats and economic losses due to a government, due to the lack of importance set by the government on agriculture in Africa. And so ethically, this brings up the problem that if we were to outlaw certain pesticides due to their danger, it may cause a price spike in existing pesticides. And so that may make it harder for developing countries or continents such as Africa to sort of invest more resources into pesticides. And so basically you have this ethical dilemma where balancing hunger prevention, where you are balancing hunger prevention against long-term health risks. And so now looking at the current policies in the US and in Brazil as an example of a developing country, the Environmental Protection Agency reports that the US has used 408 million kilograms of pesticides in 2016 with strict regulatory oversight. And so, in these regulations, workers were required to use PPE such as gloves, masks, respirators, and other forms of protective clothing when using pesticides. Additionally, the World Health Organization says that we currently have maximum residue limits that are strictly enforced by regularly monitoring our food. And so basically, both of those policies help ensure that not only are the farmers protected, but they try to protect the consumers as much as possible by reducing the or by setting a limit for the amount of residue that is allowed in our food. Now, in developing countries, and as an example, I use Brazil. Brazil is among the largest consumer is among one of the largest consumers of pesticides in Latin America. And so their widespread use of pesticides in soybean and sugarcane plantations has led to the contamination of soil and water, threatening the Amazon and biodiversity. And so, because of their lack of policies or regulations, they basically are poisoning the environment, and not only the environment, their citizens. So that shows why it's important to have policies set regarding pesticides. And so, in conclusion, currently pesticides are a necessary evil in the battle of world hunger, and that when pesticides are being used, stricter safety laws and environmental policies need to be implemented to minimize the damage caused by pesticide use. In the future, I hope that the that the government in the US and in developing countries will start to implement cleaning facilities where pesticide residue is washed off of produce to reduce the pesticide contact for consumers. Additionally, I hope that we invest more into biopesticides to reduce farmer and environmental pesticide contact. These are my citations. I'm sorry for the long-winded presentation, but I hope you enjoy.